Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, neighbors, really anyone who's caring for someone else. My name is Katie Muirhead, and I'm going to be moderating the session today. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform with people joining us from across the province, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. The land that I'm standing on is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous peoples. As team members at OCO, we are learning about the lands from which we work, exploring how we can be meaningful allies and how we can support the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land where you are, and if you're not familiar with that, we will be sharing an interactive map that tells you which traditional territory your city or town sits on. And you can find that at native-land.ca. Our webinar today is called Make Your Voice Heard, Tips for Effective Caregiver Communication. Caregivers navigate many relationships between care recipients, healthcare professionals, family members, and other folks in their communities. And when communicating in these environments, caregivers can sometimes feel frustrated. Effective communication in relationships is essential for caregivers to best support their care recipients and alleviate stress and anxiety. And today we have Dr. Naomi Greif-Sapiria joining us to learn practical communication skills to help advocate for those you care for and yourself. Naomi is a clinical health psychologist with over a decade of experience in hospitals and private practice, with a specialization in helping clients cope with the emotional toll of caregiving for someone with an illness or disability. So I want to welcome Naomi.
Thank you all so much for coming. I want to reiterate what Katie said. I know that caregiving can be so demanding, and I am honored and privileged that you all take the time today to spend this hour with me. I want to thank OCO also for providing us, of course, with this forum to talk about this really important topic. And I'd also like to thank Katie for that very thoughtful land acknowledgement, as I too work and practice here in the province of Ontario. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I am a clinical and health psychologist in Ontario, as Katie mentioned. And as a psychologist, I've worked in a number of hospital settings and also in private practice, really helping clients with a variety of emotional issues and health concerns. But currently, I actually work in private practice, and I devote my time specifically to supporting the mental health and well-being of family caregivers, like most of you on this call. And I wanted to just share that I came to this work, through the experiences that I saw while working in hospital, and realizing that there was a gap in care for a lot of caregivers, but also from my own lived experience. And for 5 years, I navigated actually the pediatric healthcare system here in Ontario while I was caring for my daughter, who was born with significant medical complexity and fragility. And it was during that time that I really truly came to see that there was really not a lot of support for caregivers out there. In fact, I met so many people who were feeling anxious and stressed and burnt out and quite clearly exhausted, but really had nobody to turn to. And I also realized that, I was never given a guidebook for the skills that I needed to be a caregiver. to advocate for my daughter, to advocate for what our family needed. And when I look back at that time, I feel so fortunate to have had experiences with her healthcare team that left me feeling, heard and cared for and like part of the healthcare team. But I also had experiences where I left, frustrated and sad and angry. And I might even go as far as to say I left with despair. And so I know firsthand just how hard caregiving can be, and how hard it is to effectively voice our concerns in that environment, sometimes to a healthcare team, sometimes to other family members who are involved in care, or sometimes even to the care recipient themselves. And so when I moved into this work professionally and I started to, learn more about it, I actually was not that surprised to learn this really staggering fact that caregivers actually have been shown to have comparable levels of post-traumatic stress disorder, so a diagnosable anxiety disorder, comparable to military veterans who are returning from combat. And when I tell the general population this fact, when I speak to other people who don't have caregiving experiences, they're always so surprised. But for us caregivers, if you think about what you have to do in a day, it's actually not as surprising as one may think. Think about all the decisions that you have to make, the difficult conversations, the advocating. Sometimes that can really feel like a battle. And so if you're a listener on this webinar and you feel like, that's me and I'm exhausted from it, you should know that you are not alone. Okay. And that's why I think today's topic is actually so important. And what I hope to do today is to really merge my lived experience as a caregiver and also strategies from health psychology, which is really a field that focuses on how biology, physiology, psychology, behavior, social factors all work together to help to explain to you why advocacy and communication can sometimes feel so difficult or even like a fight, but also offer you strategies for how to improve in that battle and make it not feel like such a battle after all. I want to also say that, my focus today and some of my examples, I'm tending to focus on communication in a healthcare space. And that's because, there's a number of caregivers joining us on this call, and I'm so happy to hear that. And some of you may be caring for parents, aging parents. Some of you may be caring for partners. Some of you may be caring for children or maybe siblings, right? And I want to make this applicable for everyone. And you will all have to face, communication issues in the healthcare environment. That said, all of the skills we talk about today can be used in any communication setting. So in anywhere where you feel like there's a communication breakdown or a conflict, these skills can be applied no matter what. And I'm also happy to delve into that further in the Q&A if anyone has any specific things that they'd like to address. So maybe we should start with, why is communication so difficult? You may all have some answers of your own, some ideas. But what I bring forth here is this idea that when you think about communication and you think about a relationship, there's always two people or two sides, right? And there are going to be things about the situation itself that make it a little bit hard to communicate. And then there are things that we actually bring to an interaction that make it difficult. So the first, thing is this idea of situational factors or things that the situation has. The second type are those internal barriers. Let's start with situational factors. And I'm going to list a couple here, but there are definitely more. When thinking about a healthcare interaction, as a caregiver, you've all had to learn a new medical language. You've become an expert probably in the person you are caring for. You know so much about them and you've learned the words you need to, but it really is and can be considered a second language, and that language can be overwhelming and it can be intimidating. So when you're already in sort of this stressful environment and needing to use these words that perhaps don't come naturally to you, that can be really hard for some people. Similarly, if you're here in Ontario and the system we find ourselves in, we don't have much control over the appointment length, and they're often quite short. So that means that we have to be precise, we have to be concise, and we have to be direct in what we want to say. And that can be a challenge for a lot of people. Also, I'm sure so many of you have heard about this idea of patient-centered care or family-centered care, but the definition of that and what it means to people or to different institutions really differs. And sometimes if you're coming into a situation where people aren't necessarily on the same page, that makes communication difficult. Related to that is actually this idea of different goals. I mean, if you're coming to a setting and you have a particular idea of what you want to get out of that encounter, but your healthcare provider, wants to give you different information, having a conversation when you're not on the same page makes communication incredibly difficult. If I polled the audience now, which I'm not going to do, but if I did, I bet that you could actually come up with a lot more things on this list. The problem for me about focusing on situational factors is that, unfortunately, we don't have much control over them. So we don't have control over the appointment length or what other people are bringing into this encounter, right? What we do have control over, though, are things that we bring to the encounter ourselves. And those are our internal barriers. And that's what I really would rather focus on today. So if you think about it and think about your own sort of beliefs, do you believe that it's selfish to put your needs first? Or do you think it isn't polite? Or perhaps it's inappropriate to ask questions, right, of your healthcare team? If you hold those beliefs, that's going to be harder for you to speak up in a situation. There's also fears, right? Are you worried that your opinion is not valuable or that there's a risk to speaking up for your loved one? That's another hard one to overcome. And both of these are actually very much influenced by the idea of stress. Okay. And of course, I don't have to tell any of you that stress is part of caregiving. What do I mean by stress? All right, let's have a definition that we can work from together. And actually, for me, the definition of stress is the body's reaction to the perception of a threat. Okay. And actually, we want to react to threat. Stress kind of gets a negative rap in that if I said the word stress, it probably evokes in you some negative reaction, right? Nobody wants to feel stressed. But actually, stress can be protective. So if you think back to our, ancestors, cave people, if they were to leave their cave and faced with a saber-toothed tiger or a tribe that's going to attack from another, area, you actually need your body to have a response to stress to make sure that you can safely get out of that situation. And the body, kind of miraculously, actually, has a system for that, where it recognizes that you need to move your body's resources and direct your energy to the functions that can get you out of threat. So if you're faced with a saber-toothed tiger, what are your options here? Well, I guess you can fight the tiger if you felt strong enough, or you can run away just as fast as you can, right? But really, you only have those two options. And that response system, some of you may have heard of it, it still serves us well today. It's actually called the fight or flight response. The idea being that when faced with a threat or faced with something stressful, your body mobilizes to cope with it. Okay. And the way it does that is actually by releasing chemicals in your body to ensure that the resources where you are needed most get that attention. So your heart starts to race, right? You get more oxygen in your blood. You're starting to breathe a little bit faster. Your body, the blood moves away from things like your digestive system or anything like that into the big muscles of your body and your arms and your legs so that you can run really fast or punch very hard. Now, we don't have tigers today, right? But imagine if you were crossing the street and there was a car zooming and didn't see you and zooming right towards you. You want that same automatic stress response to fire, right? You want to run out of the way, right? You don't want to be hit by that car. So that fight or flight response is actually protective in some ways, right? And interestingly, people, just like our bodies prepare for fight or flight, our brains and our mind do the same thing. Okay. So if you're faced with a car that's zooming down the street, you actually don't want to start thinking, well, if I go to the right, I can escape this zooming car within 3 seconds. But if I go to the left, I might need 5 seconds. And I'm going to do some calculations. No, right? You don't have time for that. You want your body to very quickly in your mind say, get out of the way. And then you just run. Okay. And so what happens when we're faced with threat and when the system kicks in is our thinking actually becomes very black and white, very inflexible, and very automatic. There's no room for creativity here or introducing any kinds of shades of gray. The problem is sometimes you can have too much of a good thing. So with caregiving stress and the idea that, the threats that come into our lives daily and those challenges, that becomes chronic. And this system was set up. I mean, you can imagine it's exhausting. Imagine if your heart was racing all the time or you're breathing quickly. I mean, that can't be sustained. It was meant for a quick threat, right? To get out of the way of immediate danger. When it becomes chronic, it actually is very exhausting and very fatiguing. And also, if we can't think in a flexible style, you can imagine that it makes communication when under stress very hard. So, for example, if the threat that you are feeling is, hey, nobody's listening to me right now, okay? Your body system actually doesn't know the difference between that threat and the threat of a car racing down the street or a tiger outside of your cave. And so the hormones that are naturally released, the chemicals that are naturally released in your body, prepare your mind to do the same thing. If you gear up for a fight, right? If that's what your response is, and you say, no one's listening, and I get angry, that might come across as aggressive or angry, or you might start to yell. If your body's preparing to say, oh my God, I just can't deal with this anymore. I am so tired. I'm not going to say anything at all. You become passive, right? And you might become avoidant and actually not get your concerns heard at all because you just keep them to yourself. Sometimes what happens then is actually that will lead to anger later, right? When you realize that your concerns aren't heard and you end up blowing up, right, at somebody you don't intend to. So you can see that being under stress actually impacts our communication style. And, I always tell my clients and my patients, try not to make decisions or have conversations from a place of stress. But I also know that when you're advocating for your loved one who is not well, I mean, what can be more stressful than that? So how can you remove the stress? I mean, we can't. We can't actually remove stress from our lives. But what we can do is learn strategies to actually manage that stress so that perhaps that system doesn't kick in quite as automatically and quite as quickly, and we can make our voices more effectively heard. Okay. And that's what I would like to teach everybody today. Now, I do this kind of with a caveat because strategies to manage stress, to communicate more effectively, to not feel as burnt out and overwhelmed by all the tasks in front of us, those are very individual. So some of the things that I'm going to say today, they might resonate with you or maybe not. Pick the ones that, feel good to you. These are some things that I work with clients in therapy to figure out, what is the most effective strategy for you to make sure that you can carry this load as well as possible. But I do want to offer these as sort of general strategies that you can rely or try to use to make this a little bit easier for you. So let's start with the first one. Recognizing our emotions. Now, recognizing emotions actually, I say it as if it just recognize your emotions, but actually it's quite a difficult task. Okay. So being able to take a step back and say, hey, my stress response is kicking in here. This comes with practice and with skill. And sometimes actually we need to actually use our body and our physiology in order to do that. to remove ourselves, take a step back from the situation and be able to really recognize what's going on. So maybe some of you have tried this, and actually there are a number of apps and even just YouTube videos you can look up for things like deep breathing. But I'd like to just go through with you an exercise that actually you can do kind of anywhere you are. So if you have your hands free, if you're not eating your lunch or otherwise doing something, and if you are, that's okay. Maybe you can practice this a little bit later. But if you have your hands free, I invite you to just put one hand on your chest and one hand kind of on your belly, almost just below your rib cage. You know, if you're listening to this on a computer, if you can make yourself kind of as comfortable as possible in the seat that you're in, if you have the opportunity where you're just kind of listening and not looking at my slides, maybe lying down in a comfortable position, or later when you practice this, just make sure you're as comfortable as possible. And basically what you want to do here is just take a deep breath, slow, deep breath in through your nose. And when you breathe out, you're going to breathe out through pursed lips, almost like you're whistling. What you notice here is as you fill your belly with air, you want your hand on your belly to be moving up and down, but the hand on your chest to stay relatively flat. Belly breathing allows you to open the body, to allow more space, and to allow that breath in to calm the body. So I invite you to take a deep breath in through your nose. Let the belly fill with air. Feel that hand expand. And then as you breathe out through pursed lips, let everything relax. You can go ahead and try that actually a few times. You know, we don't have the time here today, but I often tell people try this about 3 to 10 times and then notice how your body feels. Do you feel like there's a little bit of a release in your shoulders? Do you feel like you have a little bit more space? And when you do that, you can kind of take a moment to make that stress response just a little bit less automatic. Okay, it doesn't trigger quite as fast. And it allows you then to incorporate some flexibility into your thinking, to maybe see things a little bit more clearly, and then for your voice to be heard a little more effectively. Another thing you can do other than deep breathing is also to use visual imagery. So to picture a place that brings you, joy, happiness. A lot of people describe a beach. Think about all the elements, think about it from all of your senses. What does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And bring yourself there just for a moment before returning to the space that you're in so that you can handle whatever it is that's going on presently. Like I said, there are actually lots of apps that walk you through this or videos or handouts. But these are just 2 strategies that allow you to sort of pause that stress response just for a moment and allow you some more clarity. And clarity actually is important because then we need to respond to a situation. In communication, there's 2 people and usually you're responding to something, right? And that's where step 2 comes in, which is this idea of assertive communication. Now, what do I mean by assertive communication? Well, we just went through the stress response, right? And the stress response, if you're preparing for flight or fight, as I showed you, if you're preparing for flight, you're probably going to end up more on this passive side of the scale. If you're preparing for fight, you're probably going to end up on this more aggressive side. But there is a spot in the middle, kind of a sweet spot, and that is called assertive communication. Now, it's very often the case that I hear from people, well, Naomi, doesn't assertive just mean aggressive? It has this sort of like jarring effect for people. But actually, that's not the case. Assertive communication isn't aggressive, and I'll tell you why. Assertive communication, the definition we're going to use, is that you confidently and respectfully communicate your needs without infringing on the rights of the other person. So if you are being passive in a situation, you're actually not confidently or respectfully communicating your needs. You're kind of making other people guess what it is you're hoping to get out of this interaction, right? You're not voicing what it is that you truly want. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're acting aggressively, then you are infringing on the rights of the other person. You are attacking the other person, right? And by doing that, I mean, you can all probably think of a situation, in caregiving or otherwise, where you've been yelled at by somebody or spoken rudely to. And in fact, what that does when people say, oh, you become kind of defensive, right? What that does is it actually elicits the stress response in the other person, which makes it harder to then have a conversation. If both people are now engaging in a stress response, right? Nobody's going to be able to get their point across effectively. And I want you to think to a time where maybe you've had a communication interaction, right? Where you really felt like yelling at the other person, okay? Or you felt yourself becoming stressed or wanting to escape. But did your reaction in that situation ever actually help? Or did it actually take you further away from your goal of effectively communicating? Instead, if we communicate assertively, that actually helps you to be more clear about your feelings, express them constructively, and it actually builds a situation where there's much more trust, right? And reduces conflict. So that's what we want to work towards. And you're going to say to me now, well, that's all well and good, but how do I do that? How do I be more assertive, right? And so here's what I want to offer you. Now, I will say that there are lots of courses and books and resources. There's tons of stuff on assertive communication. So in our few minutes here today, as I check our clock, because I want to leave time for question and answers, I won't be able to get through everything about assertive communication. But what I do want to leave you with is a practical nugget that you can kind of take with you and try to use as a skill, okay, and practice as a skill. And that is the 3 F's of assertive communication. What do I mean by that? All right. So imagine yourself in a situation where you're feeling like, there's a communication breakdown, or you're trying to get your point across, but someone on the other side isn't really hearing what you're saying, or it's just not effectively being communicated. Okay, let's break that down. How can we get our voice heard a little more effectively? First things first, we focus on facts. Okay. Now, when I say facts, I actually mean objective facts or objective descriptions about the situation. So this is not your interpretation of what's going on. This is as if you were going up in front of a judge and presenting evidence, right? It has to be that you're actually objective here. This is the situation. It focuses on the here and now. You're not bringing in past experiences. You're not bringing in past arguments, okay? You're not bringing up things that people have done to you before. This is really about the here and now and what's happening in the moment. And the important thing is that you're focusing actually by doing that on the action at hand and on the situation, not on on a person's character. So what do I mean by that? You're not saying to your spouse, for example, well, you always do this and you must be the worst person. Okay. At that point, you are talking about someone's character. Okay. You want to focus on what's going on in this moment so that the other person actually doesn't get defensive. And again, their stress response isn't triggered. I'm going to give a more thorough example of this as I go through the 3 F's, and I think it will become clearer. But the second F that I want you to focus on are feelings. And now if you've been listening to my talk, you might have said, wait a second, didn't you just say, don't let your emotions take over? A calm advocate, a strong advocate is calm and doesn't rely on emotions. They do rely on fact, right? That's how your voice is more heard. But what I mean here is actually not to use your feelings to override the situation or to let them get the best of you, but to explain the emotional impact that something is having on you. Okay. And also to recognize and understand that there's another person in this interaction. Communication involves always more than one person, right? So you need to recognize that they have feelings and emotions. And sometimes when we acknowledge those out loud, that actually helps to put the person into a more receptive state to understand where it is that you're coming from. Okay. Last F, a fair request. So once we've acknowledged the facts, once we've acknowledged our feelings as well as the other person's feelings, can we come up with a solution that's a fair request? Okay, that takes into account both sides' needs and the situation, and will leave you with, from this interaction, feeling like you were heard. A fair request should be specific and can be reasonably achieved, okay, and takes into account both sides, but said clearly and stated simply so that your point of view comes across. So what do I mean by all of this? Let's give an example. When I was with my daughter, she was seen by 11 different medical practitioners, but generally speaking, they all were in one hospital here in Toronto. But sometimes, it would become very frustrating because the plan of care would involve, all of these people saying, you need to come back for these appointments, and I'm going to have to travel to the hospital 6 times in the next 2 weeks. So when I'm advocating for my needs here, or my family's needs, let's talk about the facts. The facts in this present moment are that the hospital plan, okay, or the practitioner plan, has my daughter coming to hospital 6 times in the next month. Those are the facts, okay? Can't argue, can't say that there's interpretation there. This is the calendar, that is the facts. But how does that make me feel? Well, maybe it makes me feel like, I understand that they're trying to make sure my child is checked on. But with this plan, I feel like they're not taking into consideration our quality of life or the disruption that appointments cause for my child. The missed days of school for her, the missed days of work for us, the finding of childcare for my other children while I'm taking her to appointments, right? I feel like my needs are not being heard. What's my fair request here? My fair request might be, can we work together to see if some of these appointments can be combined or done virtually? Either way, I'm coming up with a solution that might be feasible or open to a conversation. I've used an I statement to reflect my feelings. I'm acknowledging that they are trying and that's where they are coming from. And I've only simply focused on the facts of this current situation. So you can imagine if you're on the other side of that, conversation, that what you hear from that makes you less defensive and more open to an engaged conversation. Facts, feelings, fair request. If you can keep those in mind, your assertive communication skills are already getting better. I do want you to keep in mind that when you are practicing these, assertive communication is a skill like any skill. If I was teaching you how to ride a bike, I wouldn't expect you to get it on the first try, right? You shouldn't expect yourself to get this right on the first try either. Take your time when learning assertiveness and be patient. It's a skill like every other skill. Also, if you can, practice in small ways. So, maybe going into your healthcare interaction isn't that first step. Maybe you can practice in positive ways. If you have a partner at home and there's something that they've done well, you could say, you focus on the fact of, hey, you helped me with dinner tonight. Your feelings, that made me feel really good and valued. Thank you. Can we do this more often? Might be your fair request, right? It doesn't have to be from a negative experience when you're practicing, and practice in small ways that aren't threatening. The more you do, the better you're going to get at it. Next, remember that communication doesn't only involve what you say. It actually also involves your eye contact, your tone, your body language. If you feel confident, you're going to stand taller, your posture will be better. Maintain eye contact as much as you can. Just monitor your body language as you engage in this type of communication. Always be clear when you use your I statements. Those feeling statements are I statements. I feel this. Then you're reflecting it back onto your own experience, not triggering the other person's stress response, and just making your voice heard a little bit better. But make those statements clear and confidently. Always remember to breathe. I'm teaching you these skills today in about half an hour, but know that these skills are hard, right? Take a moment, take a breath, give yourself the space from your stress response to be able to engage in this type of communication more effectively. Taking a moment to take a breath won't make you look weak. And also take a break to also reflect, right? Could I have done something differently in this interaction once it's over? How could I have made it better? Could I have made it better? Right? Again, these skills take time. So the practice of it is really important. And also something that's very hard for caregivers in general, and I know from experience, try to be kind to yourself. When practicing these skills, try to engage in self-compassion. Remember that caregiving is so hard. It comes with a lot of stress, and learning a new skill when you're stressed is not easy. And if you are feeling like the stress is overwhelming, or like you're burning out, or the sadness is just too great that it's too hard to engage in these strategies, I encourage you to seek some help, be it through OCO's many programs. You are welcome to contact me. I would be honored to hear from you and help in your journey, right? But to reach out to someone who can just say, hey, let's manage the stress response so that we can make this load easier. Because I know that each of you has the unique ability, whether you believe it today or not, I know it to be true, that you can each do it. Caregiving is hard. Putting yourself and your needs first is hard. But when you practice at it, you will be able to do it, and it will make that load lighter. With that, I say thank you so much for taking your time to listen to this. I hope that these strategies help you. I wish you so much strength in your caregiving journey. And if ever you needed to reach out to any of us, and now I think I am happy to take any questions that have come up over the course of this talk.
Wonderful. Thank you, Naomi. We so appreciate you sharing this information with us today. And we do have lots of time for questions from the group. So I would encourage everyone to put your thoughts, your questions into the chat box, and we will do our best to get through those today. Listening to your talk, there's so much really practical information that you shared. So thank you. I think it's really helpful for us as caregivers to walk away with something that's implementable, if that's a word. Yes, it is, in our day-to-day. And so I really did appreciate you distinguishing between assertive versus aggressive. I think that's a really important distinction, because sometimes for us that aren't assertive naturally, or maybe a little bit quieter or a little unsure, we're not sure how to find our voice, and we assign it to aggression, and we have to be loud and we have to be upset. And so I think that distinction is really important. And one question came through as you were going through that information about, okay, so what if I am assertive, but I'm still not feeling like my voice is heard, or my loved one's needs aren't being met, or my needs aren't being met as a caregiver? What then? And I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, or comments to share.
Yeah. So I would say to that, and I do hear that often, that I'm doing my best here to be assertive. I'm not yelling at anyone. I'm trying to be clear here. And sometimes it's just not being met the way I want it to be. And it's hard for me to make a generalized statement about that. I think that for every individual, it's different. But sometimes what I tell people is that when we can't control the situation that we find ourselves in, all we can do is control our reaction to it. So sometimes those instances, most of the time probably, are going to be met with frustration and disappointment. And probably, it might eventually lead to some aggression because you're getting so frustrated. So there are tips and tools and strategies that you can use to sort of manage that frustration on your own, to notice, hey, why is this bothering me so much? What about this is becoming so frustrating? And once you can get to basically the crux of the problem there, why is it so upsetting to me? Then you can start to sort of problem solve some new strategies for how to get your voice across better. Or maybe, you need to speak to some different people, or I might need to get more support if if one thing isn't going to change in this area, maybe I need to then enlist some support around, the fact that I'm exhausted and maybe someone else needs to take over. So it's really sort of at the point where assertive communication is no longer working, just managing the feelings that come secondary from that, and then problem solving the best way to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that because all of our caregiver experiences are different, and even some of our folks joining today put this in the chat, caring for certain people where capacity and consent and healthcare privacy laws and things come into play, sometimes we're bound by that in itself, right?
For sure.
My experience caring for a person with a mental health need really resonates in those comments, right? Where
Yeah.
they have capacity to make choices, and I know that maybe they're making bad choices, and I want to advocate or communicate to help them, but there's some limitations to that. So I really appreciate that comment around managing your own feelings, because sometimes for us it's just out of our own control, and
Yes.
we don't know how to really cope or strategize around those control elements as well.
That's right. And I think sometimes recognizing that, the issue of what's stressing you out is actually maybe not the actual decision itself, but the fact that, you can't help in the decision. And sometimes, saying that, reflecting that as an I statement in your assertive strategy, that it makes me feel like I can't help, or it makes me feel helpless, right? Recognizing that is actually the piece. Sometimes that gets through to the other person in a different way than just focusing on what the decision should be.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, on the other side of that assertive communication, I've had in my experience working with folks over the years where they just can't get to that place. They're just naturally not strong communicators, comfortable with what they perceive as conflict. They're quiet. They sort of, I don't necessarily want to use this term, but suffer in silence, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have some tips or strategies for those caregivers that just, you talked a bit about practicing, but do you have any other suggestions around ways that folks can build that communication strategy to become a little more comfortable in their communication skin, to assert
Yeah.
themselves? So many of us, we've never done this before. And this is
Uh-huh.
very new and very uncomfortable. And we found ourselves in this place, and getting to that point of being a little bit more assertive or speaking up or pushing back and saying, but wait, I have a question about that.
And
Doesn't
I
come naturally. Mhm.
Absolutely. And that's why what I sort of said as the caveat is that this may not be natural for many people, and it is a skill that takes time and practice. But also recognizing all those features about yourself is so important. So recognizing those internal barriers that we talked about, do you have this belief that speaking up maybe shouldn't be what I should do? Or do you think that you're not so good at it, right? Are those thoughts and are those beliefs holding you back from actually trying this out and engaging in it? And that's where actually it's very helpful to work with someone. Those beliefs come from somewhere. And actually, I often tell people think our thoughts are facts, but they're not Just because we think something doesn't make it true, doesn't make it a reality. And sometimes working with someone like a psychologist or a mental health care provider can help you to see that sometimes our thoughts and our own beliefs hold us back from what we're capable of doing. And that's not to suggest that anyone is doing anything wrong. We all do it. We all do it. Even the best of us and the best of mental health do it. So that's just to say that if you do feel like, this is going to be a hard task for me to overcome, then recognizing that in yourself and seeking out the support to help guide you there, I think is actually quite brave and quite strong if you're willing to do it.
Yeah, and I love the notion of asking for help, right? Like as a caregiver, sometimes we need support to offset the skills that don't come naturally. We struggle with asking for help. And I've had some really positive experiences with folks who bring someone with them to document information or to communicate with them, so long as it aligns with those healthcare privacy pieces and things like that. So there's lots of ways to think about it and to minimize isolation or that feeling of I have to do all of this alone.
100%. And today's talk is, not about boundaries or about strengths. But what I will say is, of course, as a carer, boundaries and protecting yourself are so hard to do. But also to know that, if this isn't your strength, communication, you have other ones. Every caregiver has unique strengths and you can harness those, right? You can harness those to make this experience better. If you know that you're a great team player, but maybe not the best, at communicating your needs, then hey, elicit some other team members to be part of the care team and bring them together. And your role is to facilitate that teamwork. Someone else may need to be the communicator here, right? But access your strengths, use them because they'll also energize you. They'll also make the tasks less depleting when you're coming from a place of strength, and you all have them. You may not, if you're not in a place to recognize them today, know that I hold that for you because I believe you all have strengths that you can use, even if communication may not be one of them.
That's wonderful. I want to shift away a little bit from the healthcare side to those communication strategies with your loved ones that maybe you're caring for, or
Yep.
even those people that are part of your caregiving team. We've had some comments along those lines and questions along those lines in the chat around like, how do you manage the guilt that you feel when you see those communication barriers with the person that you're caring for, or that your mom or your family member or your partner who's also caregiving, but their response to things is to shut down and isolate. So I guess the question would be sort of in a broad sense, how do you build some communication bridges or connections to those folks in your day to day to help open up the dialogue, encourage them, and manage your own stress, guilt, and coping strategies?
So I would say that the same strategies that we talked about still apply here. I think that, again, we can't necessarily change other people's behavior, but what we can do is focus on our own behavior to a way that doesn't necessarily cause people to get defensive, right? And when you get defensive, that's your stress response. That's what it is. It's that fight or flight, right? So we actually want to minimize the chances that stress response is going to be automatically triggered when we speak to somebody. So when you use those I statements, right? When you reflect it back on yourself, first of all, you're showing them, you're modeling to them, right, that it's okay to be vulnerable a little bit. It's okay to show your own emotion, that this might be hard for you, but you're actually able to do it. You can also, when you're using those I statements, it's making them less defensive so that it turns the conversation to you rather than something that they're doing. And sometimes people are just more willing to talk about it then. In terms of managing your own guilt, I mean, that comes with sort of what I was saying, those secondary emotions that come with communication of how you're interpreting a situation. Should you be feeling guilty about it, or what is it that's making you feel guilty about it? That's something that you can sort of assess after the fact. Is it necessarily something that you're doing, or is it something sort of larger that's shaping or shading the situation and making it harder? Caregiver guilt is another huge topic, right? That we can have a whole webinar just on how do you manage the guilt that you feel as a caregiver, because the demands on you are so high, the expectations on yourself and on you are so high. And more often than not, we do feel guilt, but there are definitely ways to manage that and things that you can do. But first of all, it's recognizing that it's a problem.
No, I think that's a really helpful reminder for all of us that we're in control of our feelings and our experience. And as much as caregiving sort of covers not just the practical care, but the emotional care of the people we support, we're limited in that to some degree, especially caring for a person who might have anxiety, depression, other mental health conditions. We can only control our feelings and our emotions. And I think those were really great strategies and tips, and lots of great comments in the chat around how wonderful the 3 F's are and how they're going to apply that to their day-to-day as a caregiver. And on that note of guilt, for folks, if you're not familiar with our SCALE program, we do focus on guilt a lot in that space. Those recordings are on our YouTube channel. And I'm just acknowledging that we have, let's see, we've got one final question, and maybe we
Sure.
can do a quick response, and then we're going to unfortunately have to wrap it up. How do we manage fight flight so that we don't get defensive?
Yes. So defensive, I think often comes, it's not flight or fight, but it's actually fight, right? That you're ready to sort of attack back. That's kind of what defensive means. And so I think it's a great question in that you feel like you're aware that that's kind of the reaction that you're going for. And what I would say is what you need to do in that situation is use that breath exercise, take you out of that moment, because as soon as you can sort of stop that automatic cascade of all of a sudden you're going to blow up, you open up space to then use assertive communication and not come across as angrily, perhaps, as you don't mean to. And so I think that the fact that you can recognize it is a skill on its own and a strength, and kudos to whomever put that question in, that you're able to do that. And my recommendation would be, just take that moment, pause, and then create your response that's actually not in that fight mode.
Great suggestion. Thank you. And for those questions that came through around Dr. Naomi's availability and her private practice, we are sending out the recording, which you'll have her contact information in there. So feel free to reach out privately if you have other questions or you have questions around her practice. Please feel free to do that. Lots of really positive feedback around the 3 F's and wonderful presentation. So I do want to thank you for joining us today, Naomi, and sharing your personal experience and your professional experiences with the group. It is so great to walk away with such practical and tangible tips and strategies to better support us when we're communicating along our caregiving experience.
I want to say thank you all so much for having me. As I said, it's an honor to be part of your care journey in any way possible. And I send you all much strength. Good luck with those 3 F's. And I believe you can do it. So take good care of yourselves. And thank you, Katie, for having me.